Hey folks, Colin here from Sumthins Recording, and today I'm going to show you 3 steps to mixing big toms that cut through the mix. We're going to be talking about EQing toms today, but before we dive in, if you are ready to go a little bit deeper into the mixing process as a whole and really start to hone your workflow as an engineer, then I have just the tool for you. This is my 7-step mixing checklist. It's a simple PDF that will guide you through the entire mixing process, step by step, to help you get professional and radio-ready mixes without the hassle and without the guesswork. It is completely free, and you can download it below using the link in the video description. Now let's jump in here and take a look at these toms. Let me start by playing you this tom fill here inside the finished mix, and then I will solo up the drums so you can hear it inside the drum mix, and then we'll hone in a little bit further onto the toms themselves. Let me go back just a couple bars here so we can hear it in context. Here's the tom roll inside the finished mix. Now we'll do it with just the drums here. Here's same tom roll with just the drums. Now we'll solo up just the toms. You can hear the tom roll with just the toms here. Okay, it gives you kind of a picture of how the toms are sounding in the track, how they blend with just the drums, and how they're sounding raw by themselves. Let's jump in here to the 3 steps to getting big toms that are going to cut through the mix. Here's our EQ. Step number 1 for me is always to just get rid of what we don't need in the tom sound. If we go into just our toms, here's our raw tom sound. Take a listen. The first thing I want to do with my toms, obviously I have all 4 toms here sent to a group bus. I usually mix my toms as a group just so they have a little bit more cohesion inside the mix and they have a cohesive sound. They blend well together. The first thing I want to get rid of is the low rumble. So I'm going to pull my high pass filter up here to about 70 hertz. Our low floor tom is ringing somewhere in the 80 hertz range here. So we're just going right underneath it to reduce any kind of rumble from all the toms ringing as a whole as he goes across the tom roll underneath. So that's what we're rolling up here, getting rid of all that low rumble, especially from our floor tom, right? Our floor tom can have a lot of low rumble underneath its fundamental frequency. So take a listen here with our high pass in. You can hear our high pass tightens up our low end. And that's the goal. We just want to clean up our low end, tighten up our tom sound a little bit, keep them focused. The next thing I want to get rid of here, still step number 1, I held up a 2, still step number 1, getting rid of what we don't need is all of the mud in the low mids here. So we're at about 324, usually anywhere between 250, 400, and 500 is going to be that muddy area on your toms. And we're pulling out about 6.5 dB, 6.24 dB on our tom sound here. We'll start with out, then I'll pull it out and I'm going to boost it up so you can hear the range that we're getting rid of. I'm going to pull this loop back a little bit so we have a little bit more time before our tom. So here's without, and then I'll kick it in. You can hear by getting rid of all of that mud in the low mid area there. It's that kind of like nosy frequency a little bit where our toms build up there. All that kind of low mid frequencies build up as he rolls across the toms. By pulling that out by about 6 dB there, it leaves room for our low end to shine, 80 hertz all the way up to about 150 where our high tom's ringing, and it leaves more room for the top end to shine. So we're getting rid of what we don't need, and uncovering what we want, right? So our low end and top end have more room to shine through because we've cleared out space in the low mids that we don't need. So that's step number one, is to get rid of what you don't need in your tom sound. Step number two is to make sure your toms cut through the mix. For me, that means boosting a little bit of the high mid area here. Anywhere between about 2.5 to 5K is going to be a good area to boost on your toms to bring out the stick attack or the stick sound hitting the skin of the drum. We'll start with out here, and then I'm going to click it in. Listen to how we get a little bit more attack, a little bit more presence on our toms to help them poke through and cut through the mix. It'll also help them compete with our snare and the top end on our kick and our snare drum, right? So here's without, and then we'll kick it in. So there's our attack, right? It wakes up our tom sound here, takes them from being dull and kind of just, empty sounding, gives them a little bit of attack, a little bit of presence up top so they can cut through our mix here. Next thing we're going to do, step three. So step one here, a little bit of review. Step one, getting rid of what we don't need, right? So rolling up our high pass filter to get rid of all that low rumble below our fundamental on our lowest tom. Then we're getting rid of what we don't need in the low mid, right? Pulling out all of that muddiness here at about 324, 324 hertz. That's all that stuff that's just clouding up our tom sound, and getting rid of it, we leave room for our low end and our top end to shine. Step number two is making sure your toms cut through. That means going up here to our high mid area and boosting up where the stick attack or where the presence is on our toms. Step number three, our final step, is to bring up the low end on your toms as a whole, right? So all of our toms are sending into a tom bus here. It's called toms level. And we're going to boost the low end as a whole on all of our toms across all four of them to give them the beef and to give them the power they need to sit with our kick drum. So that's our main low element in our drum mix, is our kick drum. That's what has the low power. You want your toms to be just as competitive down there as your kick drum. I took it from Joe Gilder, who said he likes his toms to sound like mini kick drums. And that's always kind of stuck with me, because you want your toms to sound just as big as your kick drum. That way, when you're going through a tom roll, if there's no kick drums there, as some drummers don't play the kick drum during tom rolls, you don't lose all of your low end and you don't lose all of the power in your drum mix. So here we're at about 80 hertz, and we're just going to boost a dB and a half here. Take a listen before and then after, and we'll go a little bit further. You can hear the more power that we put into our toms here. So if we go too far, the more we go, all I did was go up just a dB, but it got a little bit too rumbly for me, so I'm going to come back down to about a dB and a half. Now we'll do an AB on the entire EQ. All three moves here, or all three steps. Getting rid of what we don't need in our drum sound, so our high pass filter, our low mid cut there, then bringing in the attack, making sure our toms cut through. That's our high mid boost here, bringing out the stick attack, and then boosting our low end. That's our 80 hertz boost here to make sure our toms have that beef and the power to compete with the rest of our drums, especially our kick drum. Here's a before and after of this entire EQ. We'll start before and then we'll kick it in. Let's do the same before and after inside our entire drum mix now, and then we'll do one last one inside the mix as a whole. You can hear how our toms go from being dull and kind of lifeless sounding to having power and to cutting through our mix. So here's just the drum mix now. You can hear without the EQ in, there's a little bit of a disconnect from that snare roll into our tom roll, because the toms are just mid-rangey sounding. They have a lot of that low mid mud. When we kick this EQ in, it sounds a little bit more cohesive of a roll because we have that top end stick attack and we have that low power coming out of our snare roll into our tom fill. Let's put our toms inside the mix as a whole and take a listen from the beginning of this snare roll here. So here's before, and then we'll kick our EQ in, and you can hear how our toms get a little bit beefier and a little bit more attack heavy, or they have that stick presence up top. Without these three moves in, without this EQ in, our toms are pretty much non-existent inside the mix. We go from this nice snare roll into just dullness kind of laying around there in the background. When we kick this in, we get the power we need to compete with our kick drum coming off this snare roll, and we have the stick attack up top to make sure it's a nice even transition from our snare roll into our tom roll. I hope that was helpful for you. Like I said, if you are ready to take your mixes to the next level and start dialing in your mixing workflow, then I have just the tool for you. My 7-step mixing checklist is completely free, and you can download it below in the video description and start creating more professional mixes in less time. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.